very lucky tonight to have an interview with the leader of the ADF party, that's the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, Dr. Teck Khong. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Glenn, for taking the time to put this program together, and I'm delighted to be on your show. Yes, I came to Britain as a teenager and was admitted to Sheffield Medical School to study medicine. And that's after a lifelong ambition of wanting to do medicine. And the background to that is very straightforward. I have seen how poorer people in Malaya suffered. I use the word Malaya because that was the country then. Federation of Malaya was effectively a British colony. So I looked towards the United Kingdom, or rather Great Britain, as the country to pursue higher education, even though Malaya had, by that time, a very well-established medical school. So on arrival, I obviously was very immersed in studying and achieved distinctions and so on. But the path was actually to get myself as broadly trained as possible. So I went into hospital medicine, rose to registrar grade, did research in rheumatology in Glasgow, which is one of the premier centres for rheumatology in the country, if not in the world, led by a distinguished Scotsman, Professor Watson Buchanan. And I learned a lot from him on how to relate medicine to the needs of the people. I then went on to enter general practice in Leicester. And I had a good fortune. At the time, it didn't look that way because a lot of people were saying, look, it's a very deprived area and so on. But I learned a lot about the British way of life, how the working people view the needs, expressed anxieties and fears and concerns. And I became a GP in one of the 10 poorest wards in the country, and that's called Ayers Monsell in Leicester. So midway through my career as a GP in Ayers Monsell, I realized it wasn't so easy to be a good doctor, not necessarily because of inadequacy of knowledge, but more about how bureaucratic measures and policies got in the way of delivering health from a professional perspective. And I had the good fortune of a patient who used to be the leader of the Leicestershire County Council Conservative group called Anna Pullen, the late Anna Pullen. And she remarked, she said, look, I see you're very passionate about offering a good service and dedicating yourself to patient care and so on. But, you really can't do much from behind a desk. You may complain, you might suggest various measures of change, but you need to get into politics. So I said, look, Anna, I trained to be a doctor and I want to be a doctor, and that's all there is to it. So Anna politely retreated, and we were good friends then. And she came occasionally and then said, well, young man, what do you think? So I said, all right, Anna, show me the way. And she introduced me, and because she was from the Conservative Party, she introduced me to various Conservative members in the local group and in the regional group. And I was led to meet the Select Committee on Health chairman, who used to be Oliver Heels, Oliver Heel of the Conservative Party. I brought along a 4-page document, I remember very clearly. I thought to be fair to both the Conservative and the Labour Party, I would give a copy to Tony Blair, you see. So I sent one to the Prime Minister. Very naive action on my part, not knowing how politics work. And I sent a copy to William Hague, and I showed Oliver Heel what I had in mind. Anyway, they had a look at it and thought, well, it's not a bad idea. I suggest if you're interested in politics and do things via politics, sit the PAB exam, you see. So I did, passed it, and they gave me Conservative badge. To me, it didn't really matter whether it was Conservative badge, Labour badge, or Lib Dem badge. All I wanted to do is to see how I can improve the health service, and that's all there was to it. So fast forward, I stood in Bradford in 2005, which I thought for a novice was not a bad showing. But things didn't go quite to plan because I soon realized that there were other things at play. I was needed to show my commitment to the party by leafleting. Now, being a single-handed GP, and I was also a police surgeon, I couldn't really afford the time. But I thought my value to any political grouping would be about policies, how policies could help people. So I was marked down. I was marked up for policy ideas, but marked down for on grassroots contribution. And much to my disappointment, when it came to a review later in 2015, together with the other candidates who were amassed in Cambridge, they went through a review to see what the candidates were made of. So we were asked questions related to our favorite portfolio. In my case, it was health, and how we would influence our supporters in the then imminent referendum. So my being a straight firing honest guy, I said, well, I'm not quite sure if Jeremy Hunt knows what he's doing. He's not achieving what I think should be done for the British public. And as for the issue of the referendum, I think unequivocally we should Brexit, because we're a sovereign nation. We're getting more handed down to us from unelected bodies. I said, I've never heard of a trade agreement that required a national flag, an anthem, a currency, and all that goes with it. So, unsurprisingly, I suppose 3 weeks later, I had my marching orders from the candidates list. Well, I thought I was going to retire from politics, which was very sad, because when I was at that particular point, I was the deputy chairman of a Conservative association. I brought all my patients out to vote in the local as well as the general election. The Conservative group in that area had increased numbers of councillors. It went from 2 to 6, and Sir Edward Garnier, the sitting MP, whose majority normally averaged between 6,000 and 9,000, and an extra 10,000 boost. So I was rather chuffed with the result, and having left the party, I thought, well, I can't stay on. I became an independent councillor, and then later was advised, or in discussions with one of the Conservative MEPs who left Conservative to become a UKIP MEP, Roger Helmer. Roger said, look, if you're so desperate about continuing politics, and we would like to welcome you to do health with us, do come across. And I pondered for a while and said, okay, I'll fight the seat where I was deputy chairman and hope to get the 10,000 I brought to the Conservative. Naive in the view that I could achieve a reasonable showing, but I ended up losing my deposit.
Right.
So I learned some lessons that politics isn't what it is. The machinations that go on behind the scene. There were things like lend Conservatives your vote, and I think I was the only UKIP member who went around with my Lauhailer in the car, saying that we need to Brexit. We don't lend anybody our votes. There we are.
Yeah, excellent.
Again, I thought I was going to quit politics. Like a cat with 9 lives, I was persuaded to hang in there and look for an opportune moment. And fast forward, there was a gang of 4: Mike Hookham, Paul Goldring, Ernie Wallander, and Keith Lonsdale set up the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. And I was invited by Keith and Mike to join them, initially to help with health. And it was a pleasure to hear, because my bias was really health. And, I saw in my, by that time, 36 years of service in the NHS, that no politician actually knew what they were doing. There were a lot of doctors who were aware of the situation, but had not the courage to stand up and say what they need to say. And obviously, there's also the consideration of a censorious climate. Politicians who were made to take charge of health portfolio, I think they had very scant knowledge of what the inside workings of health was. So I accepted their offer to join the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom assured that it wasn't a party. There wasn't a party whip. It was exactly what the name of the party said, alliance. And their vision was an alliance of all very patriotically minded independent candidates and small parties and so on, which eventually should coalesce into one formidable force to challenge the legacy parties. So that was very attractive to me. And I took the position and they very quickly said, you should be a deputy leader. And then early Warren stepped aside and said, I've got other things to deal with. Would you take leadership until such time that the party is of such a size they can elect a leader? So lo and behold, I was entrusted with that very enviable task of running a new fledgling party.
Yeah.
But my task was made a lot easier by a very vibrant group of dedicated members.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pleasure to be with my colleagues in the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. What I like especially about the Alliance, and this should be broadcast more to the people out in the public at large, is that we believe in direct democracy. We believe in a recall of errant MPs. So what appealed to me was there was no party whip because it wasn't organized on a centrally empowered body of people. There was a lot of devolved power. So we had, rather than branches, we had proud-owned groups. So if you have an enthusiastic activist group in Sheffield, you would form a Proud of Sheffield. If you have a very ardent group of people in, say, Hartlepool, Proud of Hartlepool, we have Lucinda there. You form yourself into Proud of Hartlepool, and we have Proud of Fylde, it's very active, and so on. And then, interestingly enough, interdigitating with those sorts of groups will be interest groups, professional groups, occupational groups like Proud of British Fisheries or Proud of British Healthcare Workers. So these would hopefully, in due course, feed in policy ideas based on grassroots expectations and aspirations. And I think it's a perfect way to devolve power from what would be otherwise a centrally organized party to grassroots activism. So that's the remarkable thing about Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. There's no party whip. The whip is from the constituents. I think that's a very laudable thing.
Yeah.
Today, we are faced with an invidious position of having to challenge the two established parties, which are indistinguishable in their policies. And I believe that much of the similarities between the two and the waywardness of the behavior is because of supranational influence from external bodies, control and command from things like the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and of course the ever-pervasive World Economic Forum. So one of the basic principles within the alliance movement is that we will have to appoint only candidates who believe that we should disengage from supranational unelected bodies. That is a very important, as I think, a very important parameter for the progress of this party, the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, in order that it serves the British people to the best of its ability. And it is the British people's interests that must be served, not the interests of organisation outside the United Kingdom.
Do you find I know you do a lot of canvassing on your own. Do you find it hard to get that message across? Because there's that old adage, if something seems too good to be true, then very often it's not. And people are so wary of politicians and indeed politics. I think people are on the average Joe and Joess are tired now. But do you find that the message that you put across is refreshing to people? Or do you find that there's a lot of apathy out there? Or do you find that your message, which I personally think is excellent, and I agree totally on these external forces having too much influence, do you think the average person on the doorstep realises just how much power and influence these external bodies have got?
Well, that's very interesting, Glenn. I think in my campaign leading up to this declaration of the 2024 general election, in fact, I had been on the streets for the 6 months before that. And what I've found is there's a whole spectrum of awareness of how the direction of British politics has been usurped by these supranational organizations. So we have on the one hand people who are very trusting of the established order, people who quote nothing but news from the BBC and the ITV, mainstream media basically, disregarding the fact that they might be steeped in propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that very captured group of people.
Yes.
Then at the other extreme, we have people who have either worked out for themselves or have been in discussion with their friends and colleagues who are so-called awake and discovered that there is not quite the truth that's portrayed to be on mainstream media. Mm-hmm. And these are the people who are actively welcoming parties like the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom.
Yeah.
I think, with due respect to the other smaller parties, it is a struggle. It is a struggle against mainstream media bias. And as a doctor as well, I find that the control, although a lot of people don't seem to believe it or even understand it, is the censoriousness of the government authorities and regulatory bodies on freedom of doctors to exercise their professionalism.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think we can go to that later on in greater depth as exemplified by COVID policies.
Mm-hmm. That group of people that you spoke about that really just watch ITV and the BBC, they were obviously scared on a daily basis, very often by general practitioners who were employed by the mainstream media. How did you see it at grassroots level? Did you share all the concerns that these TB doctors were putting across through the screen? Did you think it was a control exercise? Just give us your view on
Yes.
COVID.
Yes, when the news broke of a serious viral illness that's spreading across the world, I obviously, in usual doctor fashion, I often sat up and watched the news and see the progress. So I was very neutral in my acceptance of the news. I thought, hang on a second, this sounds like a really dreadful disease that's going to wipe out humanity. And you get treated to video clips and news film strips of people suddenly falling down, just rolling, dying, and all very dramatic. As I watched the thing develop and gathered information that came in a huge torrent in terms of we're developing a vaccine, is going to be the salvation of mankind from this destructive virus and so on. And I started getting to grips with the anomalies in what I saw and what I see as an operation to get people to accept the anomalous facts and statements. So you have this virus, for example. I mean, looking at simple things, this virus that can only jump 1.9 meters, but not 2 meters. And then you go to supermarkets, you find when the lockdown was eased, you find that these Perspex plates came up between two cashier lines, and you think, right, the virus can't cross this way, but it might jump over, might it not? I remember very clearly once in a supermarket, and my wife was in front of me, near to the lady in front, and the woman just turned back very abruptly and said, "Look, 2 meters, Gosh, I thought that was very ferocious, and I said quite audible under my breath. I said, "Gosh, we forgot to bring our tape measure. We need 2 meters."
Yeah.
So all these silly things, the public should have perceived that these are silly things. When you went out to a restaurant and there was this program that Rishi Sunak launched, where the people opening the restaurants would get a kickback from the government. I don't know what the scheme was called. You could dine out and
Yes,
It'll
I
be
remember it well. Yeah.
yeah. So you walk into the restaurant with a mask,
Yeah.
and we sat down, you take your mask and eat. And then when you went out to the toilet, you put your mask back on again. So these anomalies, which even to a lay person doesn't ring true.
Mhm.
Now, and then I looked at the science part of it. There's this dreadful virus. Some sources say they haven't identified it. They haven't, understood how it came to spread so quickly and how it appeared. And if you can't have identified the virus clearly, how did you manage to develop the vaccine? So, okay, you manage to get the vaccine, you develop a sequence, you pick a sequence, and science says we take from the spikes, there are about 14 or so spikes on this nucleus called coronavirus. But hang on a second, if it's based on the spike with a fixed number of protein sequence, and then you tell us, for example, the Delta variant has undergone 40 mutations, how is the antibody going to be effective if the virus has changed 40 times? It's like saying, I've got a lock, and you've got a key, and it fits.
Yeah.
Now this lock's changed, we still inject you with this key, and it's supposed to work. Well, hang on a second. So I use this simple analogy to explain to people who ask me how the vaccine works. And the other thing is, this is supposed to be a two-stage process where the spike goes and it is injected into your body, the spike sequence. It then tells your body how to make more copies, whereupon your antibody system makes antibodies. And then lo and behold, when the virus comes along, even though it's the same variant, you got a virus trap, neutralized, and bingo, you're safe. But who turns this replication thing off?
Yes. Yeah.
When does it stop? So if you then look at, and as a GP, frontline GP, I saw some very interesting cases. There were people developing shingles, not once, 5 times. How can that be? And then there are people who are previously healthy, developing conditions which they've never experienced before. And these are healthy people. They're getting odd pains here and there, abdominal pain, which, people said there were some serious cases I admitted as if it was abdominal ischemia. So one of the key cases which led me to speak on the radio was a very healthy 27-year-old woman who goes to the gym about 3 to 4 times a week, very healthy, no previous history, and coming to see me with a swollen arm, you see. I thought, hang on a second, this can't be right. I mean, it feels very swollen. And she said, well, that's where I had the injection. So I said, we better do some D-dimer test to see. That was a Friday. I don't work on a Monday. I was in locuming. I was semi-retired already by that stage. And her D-dimer came back quite elevated, about 5 times above normal. So when she came back to the surgery on the following week, the GP thought, well, it's rather strange. I mean, I don't know why Teck did the test, but we'll send you to casualty and see what they make of it. And the people there thought, well, it's rather strange too, but we'll give her some anticoagulation. Thankfully for her, the situation settled, whether it's because of anticoagulation or whatever, it settled.
Yes.
And later on, fast forward, I was doing a shift at the A&E, and a nurse saw me coming in and said, look, your colleague said that I would be correct to discharge this 15-year-old boy who came in with a mum after playing football with chest pain and shortness of breath. We did all the tests, the ECGs, oxygen saturation, chest x-ray, everything was fine. And do you think I should just let him go, musculoskeletal chest pain as the diagnosis, and come back if there was anything untoward? I said, well, if you're concerned, you should do a troponin test, just to be sure. By that time, there was quite a bit of information or reports coming in of people with myocarditis. In fact, I had written an article for publication in Daily Express, I think it was February of 2021, about the temerity to actually vaccinate children against coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the troponin result came back. It was 10 times above normal. This poor boy never had a dicky wrong with his chest or heart, was actually developing myocarditis a couple of weeks after his injection.
Mm-hmm.
So I was horrified. I was horrified.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you remember, I asked for a moratorium, not because I'm a small voice, a small party, nobody paid any attention. I asked for a moratorium back in November 2020. I said, look, we should have a debate about this, about how we're going to go forward. Recently, we heard from Conservative MP David Davis that we should be looking at, in view of the Danish report, we should be looking at these cases of vaccine injury. I think we're wasting time. We shouldn't be just looking or even trying to set up any inquiry. We should stop the damn thing.
Yes.
The moratorium is 3 years behind. We should have stopped the thing and no more, vaccination of people. There are things. I mean, I believe in personal autonomy. People should be free to choose. But when the government insists by next to coercive measures that people should have vaccination, I think that's unconscionable.
Mm-hmm.
The government should look after its people, not endanger its people. We're not talking about things that have a low rate. When you lose a life, when you have Lisa Shaw's coroner state unequivocally that her cerebral thrombosis in the brain was related to AstraZeneca, one life loss is bad enough. How many lives more must we lose? We should put a moratorium now. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, not just pontificate on the possible side effects, probably quite coincidental or whatever it is.
That's nice to hear. Okay, Dr. Khong, I watch a lot of patriot channels, and I often see people complaining that the smaller patriotic parties can't seem to get together. And you spoke earlier and said that when you joined the ADF, the vision was that a lot of parties would align and maybe even in some parallel universe, in some future world, join as one party. What do you think is stopping that from happening? Because I know a lot of people really would like to see that happening.
Well, Glenn, I couldn't agree more. I think if we return the issue or the matter to the smaller parties and ask them, how can they be a patriotic movement if the patriotic movement is fragmented? It doesn't work, does it?
Mm-hmm.
I think what a lot of the smaller parties feel is they are unique in their own way. What we need to do is to actually impress upon them that there will always be differences, but they're all minor in the greater scale of things. In the big context, what matters is we form ourselves into a formidable force of solidarity, a single force. And the differences between, say, my contribution and your contribution and so on are those things that actually distinguish us as individuals but not as a party.
Mm-hmm.
So you would come along and say, look, my forte is in the arts, in the world of arts. I'm a performing artist. And I would say, look, my strength is in medicine, in healthcare, because I spent a whole lifetime in it. And, it doesn't mean we can't work together. Our fields are different. There might be some areas of common ground and how we organize ourselves, but there will be the greater force that we should stand for. The greater force is we want to see a revival of our country. We want to regain British ascendancy in world politics, but we've got to do it in a cogent way. We can't just go fighting in different directions. That wouldn't work at all. So basically what it is very soon after joining the ADF, which was within months of its registration, and remembering it was registered in August 2020 at the time of the COVID pandemic, we weren't able to go out to broadcast about ourselves. We couldn't go canvassing for support and so on. But within a year, we were starting to build a momentum around what we saw as the vision, which was the origin idea behind Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. So I convened a meeting with the assistance and blessing of our chairman, Mike Hookham, in Leicester. And we held it in a hotel called Belmont Hotel, whereupon we had a declaration with the eponymous title, Belmont Declaration. We got Time party to attend. We had the promise that Reclaim Lawrence Fox would attend. Invitations were sent out to Richard Tice of Reform and various other small parties. But in the end, time came. Lawrence Fox phoned up and said he was stuck somewhere in a march and couldn't come up in time. Heard nothing from Richard Tice. I had also approached David Curtin of Heritage. So the end result of that first meeting was that Time Party decided to merge with us. And then we moved further forward. We had opened a dialogue with Freedom Alliance, and they wanted a few key things, such as a name change, adoption of their key principles, which we acceded to, not a problem. But I think for some strange reason, they decided not to. Happily, now we are working together. It's a very difficult situation. For example, Mike and I went to Wakefield to show our support for Reform Party at the by-election. So we were ready to join hands with them, but it wasn't to be. And I took the opportunity while I was there to speak to William Clouston of SDP, and he said we were orientated in a different direction to his party and therefore could not work together.
Right.
So there we are. That's the situation. I had in the meantime contacted David Curtin yet again, and he didn't get anywhere at all, no sensible reply. We made a trip out to Herefordshire to meet with Neil Hamilton of UKIP, and the situation was that UKIP couldn't really merge with anyone because the party was thriving on legacies bequeathed to them by the previous supporters. Disappointed by the poor response, we nonetheless kept it on the back burner, keeping a lookout for any openings to rekindle the offering. And lo and behold, when we started early in the year, we had the Freedom Alliance approaching us about, when they had a change of leadership, approaching us about joint working. So I said, yes, certainly we should do that. And Catherine Evans then asked me if there were any other parties that were interested, but perhaps no longer felt the urge to work together. I said, look, we really must rekindle. I think you're right. You really must rekindle that feeling. So I then spoke with Robin Tilbrook of English Democrats. We discussed the possibility of UKIP coming to meet us again, but they were in the throes of a leadership election. I remembered Russell White of a very small party down south in London called the Populist Party, and he was interested. And a former UKIP colleague, Brian Sylvester, who set up his own party, Putting Crewe and Nantwich First, a very local party. He was interested in coming on board. And then we had Libertarian Party UK. Martin Day said he would attend a meeting in Bromyard, which we duly set up, and it was very well attended. So the first signatory was actually Catherine Evans from Freedom Alliance. The principle of the group of six, what I call the Super Six, was that we cooperated with each other in meeting the general election 2024, because at that time when we met in Bromyard, the general election hadn't been announced, but we knew it was coming along sometime. My friend Andrew Bridgen said it could be May, coinciding with the local elections, but it wasn't to be. And then the next possibility was sometime in autumn. And lo and behold, suddenly we got hit with a July election. Anyway, so the basis of Bromyard was that we cooperated with each other by mapping out where we have candidates, where we have support, and ensuring that none of the six parties would clash in terms of having their candidates fighting one seat. So there wouldn't be English Democrats, ADF, and Freedom Alliance fighting, say, Melton and Syston.
Mm-hmm.
We succeeded to a large extent, and I remember you yourself very kindly stood down for the benefit of the English Democrats in Leighton Buzzard.
That's right, yes.
So that was very noble of you, and it's extremely commendable. So it shows that Bromyard does have a place and will continue to have a place in the spirit of what I still refer to as a Belmont Declaration, where we work together and create a formidable force in opposition to the Uni Party. And it can take any number of forms, but at the present, it seems to be working well, which is mutual cooperation, ensuring that we don't rival each other in the seat where we stand. So we have a list of 35 constituencies represented by a party within the group of 6. ADF, Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, have 10 candidates. I think the bulk of the others are made up of English Democrats and Freedom Alliance candidates. So I would encourage people out there to, wherever they live in these 35 constituencies, to consider voting for a party that belongs to this group of 6.
And what would be your message to any other small patriotic parties that might be watching this? What would you say to them?
I welcome them to come on board. I mean, in the space of a week since I went now campaigning locally, I've met with amazingly four independent councillors who all want to work with me if I became the independent MP for Melton and Syston.
Oh, that's excellent.
They basically asked me, what does Alliance for Democracy and Freedom stand for? What sort of party are you? I said, for a start, we are not a party as such. It is a platform for all patriots to come together, to contribute our skills and expertise and experience, to build a revival, to come together and build a political process to revive the country. So they like what they heard. I said we respect the constituents as the whip. We don't have a central whip. So when you come on board, you retain your independent status as independent councillor for this ward or that ward, and I'll be the independent MP for this constituency, and we work together. At some point or other, there might be a coming together. There could be a coming together, and that would be a huge strength.
Yes.
That would be a vision realized, because that would be direct democracy from birth to fruition.
Yes. Yeah.
Because what we then have is a so-called political force rather than a party, nationally based, locally activated.
Yeah. That's excellent. It sounds that sounds good. And obviously, being councillors, their votes would obviously come along with them. People that have entrusted with their votes could take it to the next level.
Absolutely. I gave them my solemn promise that as an independent MP for the constituency, I will support them in every laudable endeavour that they want to achieve for their constituents. Can't do better than that.
Yeah, no, you can't. You really can't.
So we were in a difficult position. We had our ambition to be at one with all the smaller parties. I was happy to step down at any time. In fact, I thought I could be a problem if people couldn't see me, if there were issues related to my demographics. I said, look, I was prepared to stand down. I submitted my resignation from ADF back in July, the 12th of July, in fact, 2023. But there was a clamoring for me to stay on just for a bit longer. So I'm still leading the party with all your support.
Can I just interject there before we go about? It was the fact that you've just said, because I know some ADF candidates have been getting this right wing and this far right and thrown at them, and largely because, like most people in this country, the party thinks we need to address the problem of illegal immigration and make legal immigration, have the right roads, the correct routes for it. But as you say, I think your demographic is an absolute strength to the party. And as someone like myself who has fought for equality for all skin colours, all sexualities, and all religions all my life, I think it's quite refreshing, to join a party where everyone does seem to like equality and like the fact that everyone should be treated the same, living under British law, respecting British values, but welcoming anyone who wants to live in that sort of environment and mix. So I just see you as being a strength. I can't see why your demographic would be anything to be considered other than a strength. If I'm brutally,
Yes, it's very, yes. Thank you very much, Glenn. I'm very conscious, and as I like to say freely, I'm both humble and lack an ego. There was a time when people were showing antipathy towards Rishi Sunak. So I thought I could be perceived as of the wrong demographic to lead a party with a long vision, a big ambition for the future. So that was the reason for me wishing to step down. I think I go back to my student days in Sheffield when I was, all along I've been a very matter-of-fact type of person. I remember very clearly some of my compatriots from Malaya saying, look, when I qualify or when I finish my engineering degree, I'm going off home because this is not a country for me. That was very good, I thought. People being very, very honest and following their instincts, going where they want to be. They said, I'm going back to Malaya, doing this, or going back to India to do that. That was very commendable. And, when there came a time when Islamists were threatening the peace of our country, I mentioned things like, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, and so on. I got no end of slur from people who said I'm Islamophobic. Nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, my own cousin, my dearest cousin, married a Muslim man, and we get on so well. In Malaya, being a very cosmopolitan country, I have, friends of all religions and all races coming to have sleepovers, and we used to play with each other without a care, without distinction of any kind.
yeah,
And I found it very hurtful because at the time when people said I was being phobic of some sort or another, I left my practice. I actually appointed 3 Muslim doctors to take over my practice, a practice that I meticulously built up over 36 years. Now, had I been phobic of any description, I wouldn't have bothered contemplating that.
yeah,
So there are these sort of things to consider. People malign, and there are also the wider forces that choose to detract for the sake of demolishing a rising person, for example. And I think it's one of those things which I tell colleagues in ADF, you just have to rise above that, ignore these slurs. As long as you're true to yourself, you just pursue focused and leave distractions aside, just get on. So back to the issue of patriotism, I think there's nothing inconsistent with, as you say, my demographics. I remember once when my wife persuaded me to try and move up to Scotland and perhaps stand in Scotland, because the Party is actually run as a separate organisation in Scotland. So I had to reapply as a candidate. And I remember the panel in Edinburgh were testing me out and saying, look, you don't speak with a Scottish accent, and what's your connection with Scotland? And I said, my wife comes from outside Dundee and did specialist training in Glasgow. And basically I sussed out that they thought perhaps I don't speak like one, perhaps don't even look like one. So I decided to jump the gun and say, look, patriotism comes in all colours apart from white. And there was a silence across the room. Well, that was the situation. Anyway, so I've always been a very matter-of-fact speaker, just I think being sincere and being honest is the best way forward, because if you say what you have always known to be the facts and the truth, you don't have to, strenuously remember what did I say, what did I, make up a story about, because it's always the same story.
Yes. Yeah.
So I find myself in a position of, yes, sometimes benefiting from speaking the truth, but sometimes being vilified for saying what I shouldn't be saying. I was very fortunate in this COVID period that, touch wood, I have escaped censure so far. I've been very critical of government policies. I've seen my colleagues fallen by the sword when they mention things like ivermectin and criticize the policies. It's a shame, because there's some very good colleagues of mine who've been suspended from practice, lost their livelihoods. So it's something which I want to address. The censoriousness in healthcare, in medicine, it is totally incompatible with how professionalism and how science progresses, how professionalism works.
Mm-hmm.
Science cannot progress without debate, without testing things out in terms. That's why we have experiments.
Yeah.
And ethics is very important in this COVID pandemic, for example. Having done research work, one of the things we do in phase 3 clinical studies is that we have a thing called informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is you approach your would-be volunteer or subject or whatever it is, and you explain the basis for the trial. You say, look, we have this COVID vaccine. We don't know whether it works. We're going to carry out an experiment. Would you like to take part? So you give people the choice whether to take part or decline. I don't think that was the choice as such. If you decline, you'll be pressured. You'll be getting texts from a GP to come.
Yeah.
And it was relentless. And you take it to the extreme where the Sergeant Javid would say, no jab, no job for healthcare workers. No, that's untenable. So we have informed consent that was missing from COVID vaccine. We also have the offer of alternatives. So if you didn't take part in the COVID vaccine, and if COVID vaccine was so good, and if you should fall ill, we would be looking to see how we can treat you with alternative measures.
Mm-hmm.
We were spending billions on COVID vaccine and virtually nothing on alternative therapies.
Yeah.
And people were whispering in the background, what about hydroxychloroquine? What about ivermectin? Mm-hmm. And those people who dare say it in official circles were slaughtered.
Yes.
No, that can't be right. I mean, even if they had no basis, they should at least give these people a chance to explain why they think there should be an alternative treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Third is surveillance. Now, when you put somebody into a clinical trial, the ethical requirement, the stringent ethical requirement is you monitor the safety of the drug or the product. So when I was doing clinical trials back in Glasgow, what we said was, look, we start this treatment. Before we start, we check your criteria, whether you fit, whether you're pregnant. If you're pregnant, you can't enter the trial, whether you're this and that. And we do baseline studies. We check your hematology, your biochemistry, your renal function, everything, to make sure everything's fine. And then we put you in the study. If all those things came back acceptable, you're in the trial.
Yes.
And you could have the option of saying, halfway through, I'm sorry, I decided to change my mind, I'm opting out. Mm-hmm. And you can opt out.
Yes.
Instead, you get, when are you coming for your second booster, your third booster, your fourth booster? Right, yeah. None of that bloody nonsense. Anyway, so you have surveillance. You carry out interval surveillance for safety. Mm-hmm. So I remember with anti-inflammatory pill, there was some severe liver toxic problems in one patient. And not only was the patient withdrawn and treated appropriately, the drug trial came to an end. Mm-hmm. And people were asking me, are you sure? I said, look, if you don't stop the drug trial, I'll report it.
Yes.
The drug trial was stopped. And that should be the way. The doctor should always be the advocate of the patient, whatever the circumstances.
Yeah. I think with the COVID, everyone became an expert in respiratory diseases and vaccinations. But when I saw people like Dr. Robert Malone, who was instrumental in the mRNA process, and people like Johnny Anidis at Stanford University, world-renowned virologists and immunologists who were cancelled for coming out and saying, well, A, they thought it was created in a lab in many circumstances, and B, that it wasn't that dangerous. And when Malone came out and said, look, this wasn't designed for this, and the tests have been nowhere near stringent enough, it sort of bears out what you're saying. Unfortunately, I mean, I saw those things on alternative media, but as you said right at the start, if someone just watched ITV or the BBC, they wouldn't be aware of any of that, unfortunately.
Yes, that's why I'm not a high-flying international figure, but what I do, what I see, I report, and I have direct frontline experience. So when I have a case of abnormal thrombosis, I see it, I report it. I don't have huge number of cases to collate. I don't,
Yes.
I don't have the knowledge of knowing the intricacies of biotechnology, of molecular engineering, and so on. But what I see, what I report is what I've seen for myself, substantiated by laboratory evidence. So when I say, this boy's troponin was way above normal, unequivocally suffering from myocarditis, it is. Those results don't tell lies.
No.
Now, apart from the lack of surveillance, the number of people who are given shots and then return to the doctor and say, I've got this or I got that. And the doctors will say, well, no, I don't think so. I think it's coincidental or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I personally think there was a huge underreporting. Yeah. And because we as doctors were not allowed to consider the likelihood of serious adverse events arising from these vaccines, there was serious downplay of the adverse events, the difficult situation with adverse effects. So we were operating in very censorious situations. Mm-hmm. And then there was this, people get jabbed and they say, go away, everything should be all right. Well, things are never all right. You should always follow up. Mm-hmm. There was no follow-up. And if people reported they were dismissed, that can't be right. But above all, you see, and this is the malaise in the health service, and there's financial inducement.
Right.
So for those people who want to earn extra money, there was a great opportunity.
So were the doctors actually paid to give the jabs, or?
Yes, I think it started with £14 something upwards, and I didn't take part in any of the vaccination programs, so I wouldn't know the exact figure how it's gone on. Yes. So those financial inducement distort professional behavior. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad or good. I'm saying the pressure to fulfill the program plus the financial inducement do not add up to a good mix in terms of ethical practice.
Yes.
And this will lead me to the next issue about how the health service has been degraded. I remember when I started general practice back in '82, mm-hmm. The bulk of the income came from capitation. A smaller proportion was made from very simple targets like cervical smears, immunizations, and so on. Towards the end of my career, it became a very small fraction. Mm-hmm. And the bulk of the income came from meeting targets from identifying how many people were Irish, Japanese, English, whatever it is. You get a payment for ethnic identification. You get a payment for identifying how many people were smokers, and another payment for how many people actually quit smoking. Even though they quit for a month or two, you still get a payment. And these things eventually became the way to practice medicine. If you wanted to be fluid financially, that is what you would do. You would chase the targets. Mm-hmm. I remember back in 2015, Leicester Mercury published a list of ranking of GPs by popularity as voted by the patients, and I was right at the top page. They wrote health centre, and then lo and behold, a few months later, when they had a ranking of GPs, my income was right at the bottom. In fact, I was told by my practice manager, he says, "Look, doc, if you're not careful, you'll be in special measures." I said, well, special measures for what? For not looking after the patients or not looking after the government?
Mm.
So there we are.
Well, I think the people of Melton and Syston will be very lucky to have someone with that moral code, Dr. Khong. To be honest with you, so let's hope they realise that by the 4th of July. Right. Another thing that I've been asked to ask you is your thoughts on the drive for net zero.
That is a very complex subject. First of all, net zero is linked to climate change agenda. So we got to have everything down to net zero because it's supposed to benefit, be a positive effect on climate change, adverse climate change. We have a very eminent scientist in ADF, Edmund Fordham. He's looked into energy sources, and I would say in discussion with him and talking to other people that this climate agenda is, in common parlance, a big scam. And climate changes, but not to the fear-mongering degree that the authorities want us to believe. But that will facilitate the introduction of very draconian measures. You need to pay more in taxes to sustain them. We invest very heavily in turbine energy, which actually is a very basic source. We have all this self-flagellation in stopping coal-fired power stations, while other countries, eminently China and India, will have coal-fired power stations. So we're in a difficult situation where we reduce our economic viability by an adherence to something that has no real scientific basis. But it also lends the ability of the government to impose certain things. So if we have a net zero based on carbon credits, let's say, if you drive a car that takes more, that produces more carbon dioxide than my car, you'll be penalized. So that would help bring in a credit system, a social credit system. And if you're not careful, you violate your allowance and you have your allowance reduced. And then you can tie that in with low traffic neighborhood. So you find that because of the enthusiasm to reduce emissions, people are paying a heavy price in terms of ultra low emission zones. You find yourself being constrained further because of this imposition of low traffic neighborhoods. So you can start to see how things eventually build into a big net that actually enslaves the people.
Yes.
So your freedom of movement will be restricted. You'll be impoverished because you have to pay more taxes, and then you have to pay for the luxury of moving about. And then you find that the cities are now they're building more and more densely populated areas. So eventually there'll be sort of self-contained units of urban districts, and nobody moves about. I look outside and see, cycle lanes getting out of towns, and I'm just wondering, when I reach the gradual age of 90, will I still be cycling to town?
Yes. Yeah.
And then if I'm slightly deaf and slightly poor-sighted, when I ring up for help, I'm in a queue, and please go and visit our website. Well, if I can't see, I can't visit the damn website. You know what I mean? So I digress. What I'm seeing is that net zero is part of a big web of entrapment for the people. It ultimately enslaves and impoverishes us.
So can I take it that if the ADF were in power tomorrow and were led by you, the net zero policy wouldn't be taking place?
Well, two things. First of all, I do not see a situation where ADF becomes government overnight.
No, good.
But if I were in Parliament,
I was talking hypothetically, yeah.
If I were in Parliament, I would lobby strongly for zero nets, not net zero, zero nets. I'll repeal. I will join colleagues, look for independent colleagues in the House to say we'll get rid of the climate change agenda and get rid of everything related to net zero.
As you've explained, with the party, you've got experts in each individual area of policy. So it's unfair to ask you intricate questions on all the policies. But illegal immigration comes across on the door an awful lot. What do you see the solution to stopping the boats, if you like?
Well, interestingly enough, I sounded the people who expressing support for the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, noting that one of the basic principles is we are not against immigration, we are not against controlling immigration, and we are certainly against illegal immigration.
Mm-hmm.
So what they say is, well, what would you do? So I turn the question around and say, I know what I'll do, but as your representative, what would you like me to do?
Mm-hmm.
So they said very clearly, they said things like, do we have your support if we said we turn the boats around? I said, definitely. I said, what do you say if we said we had defined areas for containment? I said, that is also acceptable. What do we say if if they can't produce papers to identify who they are, where they've come from, we put them in a compound, we treat them nicely and give them accommodation, but they don't have the freedom. The only freedom they have is to return to where they want to come. Mm-hmm. Those that come from France, having been there for quite some time, may choose to go back to France. Or those who come from even further afield may want to return to the homeland. I think the bigger issue is to do with the displacement of these foreign nationals. Mm-hmm. What we have is the invidious acts of aggression from the so-called superpowers or whatever it is. We should not be fighting foreign wars that have nothing to do with us. Mm-hmm. We end up destroying nations far away in distant lands, displacing these nationals, and they come as illegal immigrants, if they're in fact illegal immigrants of that ilk.
Yes.
So we have two classes of people. One is economic migrants, and the other is asylum seekers. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think this country, for all its talk about halting illegal immigration and so on, is so insensitive not to understand the survival instincts of asylum seekers, genuine asylum seekers.
Yes.
And as far as economic migrants are concerned, if we have impoverished those countries to benefit the few who control the mechanics of war and the rebuilding after the war, they are the ones who should be brought to account as to why the war was started in the first place. So, if the Kurdish people flee and come here and say we're looking for work, we're looking for survival, you can understand that. But we should be fighting the war in Iraq and displacing them.
Yes. Totally. Excellent answer. Yeah, totally agree with it as well. Now, manufacturing in this country, and partly we touched on net zero, but it would appear to most people on the doorstep, I think I can speak generally, that they're concerned that we've basically stopped manufacturing anything in this country and that we've sent everything abroad. China does I believe does most of our steel now. Up until the Ukraine conflict, Russia was actually refining our oil and then returning the refined oil back to us on diesel burning ships. So from a manufacturing point of view, how do you see getting the country up and going again?
Well, there's several things, Glenn. I think, first of all, we need to encourage our homegrown industries. So we start by ensuring that we don't put up barriers for our small and medium enterprises. We should try and revive our domestic industries. We should be self-sufficient in energy, in food. So we reduce the red tape. We also reduce the tax burden. Corporation tax has gone up. People cannot invest without the constraints that's imposed on them in terms of financial penalties. Mm-hmm. So they should be given every support. And, the anomalous situation is huge multinational corporations pay less tax than all the SMEs combined.
It's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
Hmm.
I didn't know that.
There are ways of, because they have the understanding of where they can shift the money and profits around. They escape any taxation. There are lots and lots of things. I'm not a taxation expert, but there are these sort of things that need to be addressed.
Yes, yeah, definitely. How would you raise funds for the things that you wanted to do? Because obviously people say there's not a lot of money about because of
On the
COVID,
contrary,
because of
Glenn,
the furlough scheme.
on the contrary, Glenn, we spend too much money wastefully. I mean, if you look at the illegal immigration issue, we spend £8 million a day when we have, our own people in difficulty finding houses. We spend an awful lot of money on
Yes.
foreign aid. I've done a field project on foreign aid. I went to see a village headman, for example, and he said, "Look, if you come from a Conservative Party and you've got money to offer us, please don't give us the money." I said, "Why?" He says, "The last time there was $250,000, we only had 50,000. We wanted a bridge building, we wanted a hydroelectric powered tap, we were trying to do eco farming. You live not far from JCB. Could you help us negotiate a low cost lease or whatever it is? Get some tractors." These sort of things. He says, "What we need is skills transfer, knowledge transfer. We don't want money. We just want your assistance." He said, "You have school leavers, gap year people, retired teachers. English standards have dropped. The use of English language, the English language proficiency has dropped since we became independent. Could you build a system of educational support in similar to the US Peace Corps, for example, help us improve standards of education, improve standards of health?" Money is not an issue for us. We don't need your money. We just need your guidance, your support, your knowledge, your skills.
Yeah.
So those are the things. We spend too much money in fighting foreign wars. We spend too much money. I don't know. I mean, there are people who say this is part of the big conspiracy, not on the side of the people, but on the side of the elites and the globalists. So they go in and make a war. So they build armaments to make themselves prosperous. The destruction that follows will then lead to a period of reconstruction. And the people who are standing, the bodies and rebuild whatever it is that's broken, and they make money from it. And all, would it be appropriate to call it money laundering? I don't know.
Well, after a month, one of the people that visited Zelensky a month into the war was Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock.
Yes.
And they signed a rebuilding contract
exactly
a month into the war. The same BlackRock that's got shares in everything. I was stunned that they've got shares in all our major supermarkets in the UK, as well as owning most weapons manufacturers on all sides who give arms to all sides: Ukraine, Russia, America, China, you name it. BlackRock's there.
That is precisely something that Robert Kennedy Jr. said, isn't it?
Yeah.
That these defense manufacturers profit on war.
Yes. Yeah.
And the taxpayers pay for all these expensive weaponry.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Khong, perhaps we could close with you telling us why people should vote for their ADF candidates.
Yes, very simply, it's because of our dedication to serve the constituents. We also believe fervently in local democracy. So I think it's a no-brainer that an ADF member of parliament will serve the constituents. We also have a rigorous recall system so that if they start behaving in a wayward manner, contrary to the wishes of the constituents, they will recall, and we would encourage a by-election to replace them. So I think, yes, ADF should be the way forward, because we are going to be the voice of the people, the servants of the people, rather than the other way around. I mean, quite often in my campaign trail, I've come across people who say, oh, the MP only comes around asking for votes at election time, but you don't see them in between.
Mhm.
I would endeavour to be there for my constituents if I became an MP, most times when I'm not in Westminster.
Excellent. Well, all I can say now is to wish you the very best of luck in Melton Syston at the general election. I think they'll do very well to vote for you and have someone like yourself representing them in Parliament. And wishing the ADF all the very best for the future, and encourage anyone watching this who likes what you say to support by joining the party. Okay, thank you very much for your time, Dr. Khong.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you very much, Glenn. Good night.
Yeah.